Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Monday, October 7th, 2013, start of a brand new week of utter insanity and craziness. Oh, what will these bozos in Sodom on the Potomac come up with next to make our lives so miserable? This, of course, is we're continuing what is being called the government shutdown. Well, it's not really shut down all that much because over the weekend the House of Representatives passed a bill so that all of these furloughed workers are going to get their paychecks for the time they get to sit at home and play with their kids and catch up on their TV watching. They're going to get all that money. And as of today, the defense staff is back at work at the Pentagon. That accounted for half of the supposed furloughed workers. So they're all back on the job today. And between that and granting all these workers all their back pay, the supposed cost savings of the shutdown have completely evaporated. And that tells us, oh, this shutdown stuff, the closing the monuments, all that, it's just theater. It's just theater. The government is trying to coerce you into allowing future generations to be plunged further into debt by withholding those parts of the government you actually do want and approve of. And by the way, I'd like to make a point here. All those national parks, all those monuments, they belong to we the people. The government doesn't own those lands. We the people hired the government as the caretaker of our public lands. They're there to empty the trash cans and keep the litter picked up and clean up the dog poo. And if the government doesn't want to do that, that's fine. But that does not give them a right to chain the gates and keep us out of our parks, our monuments. It's just staged pain. They're trying to maximize the pain and affect as many people as possible. So we'll call up our members of Congress and say, please, plunge future generations into debt. I don't care. I want to go to the National Monument. It's all theater. It is all theater. Now then, what exactly is shut down? Well, again, it's all the stuff that's highly visible. The monuments, museums, those websites that people go to for information. And by the way, those servers are still running. You're able to see that this website not available because of the shutdown. It means the servers are still running. Those websites could still be there. Somebody actually spent additional money to change the index page, the main page of the website, to give you that message. You can't come in here because you won't allow the government to go further into debt. And they're going back and forth, and the finger pointing is going on here. And behind all that theater lies a question that the U.S. government is terrified Americans are starting to ask. Why, when the Constitution grants the government authority to create and issue interest-free public currency, is the government borrowing that currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? Nobody actually has an answer other than corruption, why the government would do such a stupid thing. When we are living under exactly the same type of banker predation this nation fought a revolution to be free of. As far as Obama himself, not to worry, his golf course is still open. He's still able to go on out there and hit the links in his copious amounts of free time here. State Department just awarded a $5 million contract for new crystal stem and barware for all of the embassies, because we know how tanked up those diplomatic personnel like to get, and they like to think it's all high class getting tanked up. So they have to have crystal stemware to drink their whiskey from here. Now, I want to take a moment here to do a tip of the hat to Sam's Club. Last week, Sam's Club announced that while the commissaries and PXs on the military bases were shut down, that anybody with a valid military ID would be allowed to come into Sam's Club and shop without having to buy the membership, which I applauded. Now, over the weekend, Claire and I went to our local Sam's, and it was just jammed with all these military families there walking around in their camo outfits, which is kind of weird because when you're in a big box store with all that white enameled metal shelving, they stick out like a sore thumb. It's really not a very effective camo. But they were in there, and most of them were very, very pleasant. There were a couple that seemed to be irked they were having to mingle with a civilian non-combat hoi polloi. But most of them were very friendly, had their little babies with them in their camo diapers and the rest of that. By the way, speaking of controlling government spending, do you know that every single branch of the military has their own version of camo BDUs? They're all slightly different, and they all support a different corporate management structure at the company that makes them, rather than simply buying them all from a single provider to save money. But that's the way the government operates these things here. Now, all this screaming about ending of welfare payments and so forth, it turns out Arizona is the only state to stop welfare checks during the shutdown. All the other 49 states are keeping the money going. They're tapping into alternative funds. They're keeping the money going to the fragile members of our society here. But I think one of the worst public relations disasters the government has suffered under this shutdown was the shutting of homes around Lake Mead. Now, this is federal land, but it has private homes on it that lease the land. And a lot of people have vacation homes there. A lot of people have their primary residences there. And the government went in and said, you have to get out. Because of the shutdown, you may not use the federal lands even though you've leased and paid for them. And that included this elderly couple who owned that home for 40 years, guys in a walker. And they made them leave, go find a hotel or a motel, something like that, saying, you will not be allowed back into your home until you agree to allow the government to plunge future generations further into debt. I think we've hit the stage in the nation's history where everything the government does to try and assert their control over we the people backfires. It just makes us angrier and angrier and shows that, in point of fact, this government has lost control. If of nothing else, the debt and the economy. Now, over at Lake Mead, they had a big protest where all the people who normally would put their boats on Lake Mead decided to just drive them down the middle of Las Vegas because the government is claiming sovereign ownership over the lake, and while the budget is shut down, you can't use lakes, you can't use earth. They even tried to shut down a bay, opening out onto the ocean, saying, no, you can't come into the bay. They're shutting down things they don't actually fund. They've shut down parks that are totally state-funded. And they're playing this game where if they take away the things we want, we'll gladly accept those things we don't want, like high taxes, more wars, an increase in the debt passed on to our children, and Obamacare. Pretty much everyone I know who is not on a U.S. government paycheck is very angry right now. And the people I know who are on a government paycheck, they've gotten real quiet lately. They don't want to talk about what's going on. They've stopped leaping to the fore to say, oh, the government is right and we've got a war on terror. And they just, I don't want to talk about it. They just sort of fade into the woodwork. Tom Hanks is out there giving his seal of approval for the World War II veterans for storming the D.C. Memorial. And he's absolutely right, and I'm absolutely in agreement. Good on Tom Hanks and good on those vets. Every World War II veteran in the country ought to be converging on Washington, D.C. right now. And remind them, these monuments belong to the people. The government is merely a caretaker, a janitor. That's their role in this constitutional republic. They're there to keep the bridges in good repair, the roads free of holes, keep the schools and hospitals put together, and take care of our national lands, our national monuments, and our national parks. And if they don't want to do that, that's fine. They can submit a letter of resignation. But they do not own those objects. We, the people, do. And if the government wants to quit being the janitor, they can do that. But it does not give them the authority to lock the people out of our own property. It's just a scare tactic. They're trying to scare us into agreeing to an increase in the debt ceiling, to shackle future generations of Americans to this artificially created debt when this government is supposed to when this government is supposed to be. I'll finish this when we come back from the commercial. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I'm going to keep hitting this point. All of these national monuments, all of these national parks, all of these other facilities are paid for by U.S. tax dollars. The land they sit on is the common heritage of we, the American people. The government does not own those facilities. We, the people, hired the government to be the janitor, to keep the place clean and orderly. And if the government cannot or will not perform that function, they're free to resign, but they do not have the authority to lock the people out of the people's property. Period. End of discussion. All righty, we got a caller on the line, John in Montana. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha to yourself there. We've talked before. I recently moved, but still in Montana. And, you know, the BLM and the National Forest Service, now we got to fill freezers this time of the year. And there's plenty of deer running in neighborhoods and everything else to be able to do that. But they have suspended that. And also, did you know that
when you say they've suspended that, how have they suspended people hunting to put food in their freezer? Are they just withholding the licenses and the deer tags?
Exactly. It's national forest. It's no, they're blocking you out. You can still get a deer tag, and you can still go and hunt on private property and that. But they kicked everybody out of Yellowstone, out of Glacier, gave them 48 hours, and the other thing they tried to do was quit the Army-Navy game until they found out that it was privately funded.
Right.
And he wanted to try and shut down Army and Navy from playing football. It's
you raise a very, very good point here, and I don't know if you're watching all these shows about Alaska's wild frontier and everything, and Claire and I watch it a little bit here because I grew up in farming country, okay? And I think most Americans in the urban environment do not comprehend how many Americans are dependent on being able to go out and hunt to put meat in the freezer for those winter months, especially in these hard economic times. Now, the whole reason for allowing people to hunt in the national parks is to keep the population of the deer and elk and so forth under control. And it's wildlife management. And apparently they're saying, we'll just let the deer breed like, crazy, and they'll destroy the ground cover, and we'll have more forest fires and the rest of it. It's all theater. They're trying to inflict as much pain on the American people as they can so that we'll call up our Congress critters and say, yes, I don't care how much debt you throw onto my great-grandchildren. I'll be dead by then, and I don't care anymore. But we do care. We do care, especially because we understand this debt is a fraud. It is a tool Go ahead.
Their state would open the Grand Canyon. Their state funding would open the Grand Canyon so the tourists can see it, And this is the type of year in Yellowstone National Park, the elk are breeding. People love the picture taken of the elk everywhere. And now they closed down the gates on Yellowstone National Park. And it was the first park founded by Teddy Roosevelt that started the national park system.
It is. It's just all for show. They're trying to say, well, if you won't let us go into debt, you don't get to play with your own property. And that's really what it comes down to. Those national parks are the property of the people. And I know from things we're getting like out of the state of Wisconsin, they are ready, willing, and able to take over management of those parks using state funds and tell the government to get the federal government to get the heck out.
Yeah. And another thing I wanted to add, and this weekend coming up, when the truckers are going to D.C., and the vets are going to D.C., and the bikers are going to D.C., and anybody that can support them on any overpass with a sign saying more power to you, and then they want these truckers, if they can't make it to D.C., to go to the state capitals they're in and shut the state capitals down.
We don't even have to shut the state capitol down. Just put a big banner on the side of your truck saying, I support the truckers' ride to restore the Constitution. And by the way, getting back to the national park situation, those parks rely on large numbers of unpaid volunteers.
Yep.
And why are those volunteers being told that they can't continue to go in and take care of the parks in order to keep them open? It's all designed to try and shock you into going along with the increase in the debt ceiling and to distract you from asking that question that we all should be asking. When the Constitution gives the government the authority to create and issue an interest-free public currency, why is the federal government borrowing public currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? That is the question we have to be asking of ourselves, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, everybody in the government and everybody in the media. It is the one question they're trying as hard as they can to completely pretend doesn't exist. Like this private central banking is just the way it's supposed to be because the imaginary playmate in the sky has said this is how you should live your lives. And it has nothing to do with the imaginary playmate in the sky. It is a centuries-old fraud being perpetrated on the entire human race. And it has run its course, and it is time for it to go away.
They want to yell the sky is falling.
Well, the sky is doing just fine. The world isn't really broiling, and all of this financial shenanigans, it's a complete fraud. And it's time for it to go away. All righty?
I agree.
All right, John.
All right, aloha, partner.
All right, aloha. Beautiful country, Montana. I absolutely love it up there. Anyway, listen, another story that we're getting here, this is coming out of Washington Times, how the National Park Rangers have been ordered to keep visitors out of privately run businesses. Now, this actually began the end of last week where the operators of a private hotel that had a concession inside a national park were told to shut down. And the owners of the hotel stood up and said, no, we don't get federal money. The shutdown's got nothing to do with us, and we are staying open for business, whereupon the park rangers blocked off the driveways to keep people from getting in there. And now apparently they're adopting it all over the place. Privately run businesses that have the concessions inside the national parks are having their access blocked off by the park rangers. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. Those of you who own a private business, put a sign in your window saying no federal employees or government workers are allowed to enter these premises. Two can play that little game. Now, as I mentioned, Wisconsin has invoked their 10th Amendment protections because obviously the federal government has gone way beyond their constitutional authority in pulling all of this stuff. And so Wisconsin has tapped into some state funds they have to reopen the parks inside their state borders. This attempt to scare us or coerce us into accepting more debt on future generations by shutting off access to our public lands is backfiring horribly. The Amber Alert website got shut down. Their server is still running. You can go over to that website and you'll get the page not available during the shutdown, which I'm sure the pedophiles are having a field day out there running rampant. But for some reason, Michelle Obama's Let's Move website, that's still up and running and open for business. Now, we're starting to see a huge propaganda push that the Republicans, the GOP, are going to pay a heavy price next year for standing firm on Obamacare. And there was this poll put out by the Public Policy Polling, which is a very liberal-leaning organization, saying, oh, yes, Americans are blaming the GOP, Americans are blaming the GOP. No, they're not. They are absolutely not. And the finger-pointing is going back and forth, and it's not the Republicans and it's not the Democrats. This budget impasse, this crashed economy, is a bipartisan problem deserving bipartisan ropes around bipartisan necks, and arguing over whose neck gets the tallest tree and shortest rope is a distraction. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we were talking before the break about how the finger-pointing is going on. Oh, it's the Democrats' fault. It's the Republicans' fault. Let's divide along these lines and quarrel with each other so we don't recognize it's a systemic problem. So I ran a poll over at whatreallyhappened.com. Who is to blame for the economic ruin of the nation? Let's see. Republicans, hang the bastards, got 2% of the vote. Democrats, hang the bastards, got 2% of the vote. Wall Street, hang the bastards, got 2% of the vote. And all of the above, hang the bastards, got 94%. And I think that tells you that the American people aren't falling for this false paradigm of left versus right, liberal versus conservative, Republican versus Democrat. We recognize it is a problem with the system as a whole, and it all goes back to that betrayal of the American people by the United States federal government 100 years ago, when they sold us back into the slavery of the very same private central banking scam we fought a revolution to be free of. And that's what you should be talking about. Because does it make any sense at all for a government with the authority to issue an interest-free public currency to borrow public currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? It's not like they're borrowing gold or silver or something with value. The Federal Reserve just prints up the paper and ink, same way the U.S. Treasury does. In fact, the Federal Reserve hires the U.S. Treasury to print up the paper notes, or they just type it into a computer. That's it. That's all that is behind all this money being borrowed from the Federal Reserve to save the government from its debt crisis. Well, the debt crisis would not exist if the Federal Reserve had never been allowed to come to power, and the president who signed the Federal Reserve Act, Woodrow Wilson, wrote in his own diary after the fact, "I have unwittingly destroyed my own nation." Now, speaking of government waste, we know that the TSA is a very, very costly enterprise that grabs our crotches, spreads sexually transmitted diseases, likes to look at our wives and our daughters naked, steals a lot of stuff from our luggage. They dropped and wrecked a laptop of mine, and they have yet, in all their years of operation, to actually catch a real terrorist. And today, there's a new embarrassment, because apparently there was an incident where the TSA were too busy looking at their naked body scanners at the hot chick, and a 9-year-old kid walked onto the airplane past the TSA. Talk about a waste of dollars right then and there. All righty. Speaking of airlines, a little side note, then we're going to take a phone call. Apparently, Airbus has succeeded in breaking into the Japanese passenger airline business. They succeeded in clinching a deal for 31 Airbus jets with Japan Airlines, beating out Boeing, who up until now had a pretty much solid lock on Japan Airlines. But with all the accumulating problems of the Dreamliner, a lot of people are very concerned about acquiring that particular piece of hardware and putting it into service. And it is a reminder that Boeing, like much of the United States of America, used to put out a quality product until the money junkies came in and said, how can we make this cheaper, 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 cheaper? Because we've got to have profit, 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 profit to make our stockholders happy, 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 happy. And literally warped our nation's character to where it's all obsessing about those pieces of paper with ink on them and pride in your work, desire to have the best made product in the world. Those just completely went away. It's all about maximizing profit. And guess what? They gambled on maximizing profit by cheaping out that 787, and now they're not going to get any profit at all. Going to go to the phones here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Just checking in. You know, Mike, preach it, brother. You're right, hitting the nail right on the head. You know, this thing with this, how many people in America are trying to keep their houses? Mm-hmm. How many people in America are trying to keep food in the refrigerator? Let me tell you something, Brother Mike. I'm not even thinking about going to our national parks right now. Mm-hmm. This is just ridiculous, like you said. This guy, kudos to him out there in Montana. I was out visiting Yellowstone a few years back with my brother. What beautiful country that is. I got to see the bison, the moose, and everything. But it goes back. You little kids can't do that. And you know what, Mike? The bottom line is it goes. You're right, hitting the nail on the head with this. Started back in 1913 with these amigos went up on Jekyll Island and just put in this Ponzi scheme that is totally destroyed the middle class. And Mikey, you know, you talked about the infrastructure. I mean, some of these roads out here where I live at, you have to go into the repair shop every 2 weeks because your suspension gets racked up and destroyed. But the bottom line is the puppets there. What they need to do, Mikey, these senators that still want to go with the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence should get on their horses and strap their boots on and ride back into their states and do what Wisconsin, and I'm glad to hear that, is say, stay out of our state, and if you don't, we're going to hire our big attorneys to fire back at this cesspool toilet bowl out in Washington, because they can't even take care of their own playground, yet they're messing around in our state and many other states' playground. And the only way that you're going to control this I believe, is to come back into your state senators and grab a pair of balls between your leg or whatever and start hammering on this dictatorial fascism, satanic government. So, Mike, thanks for taking my call, and you keep up that preaching, brother.
All right, well, thank you very much here, and there's a couple of points you need to remember about the roads. First of all across America, the rural roads are being allowed to go back to dirt and gravel. They're not. They stopped repaving them like years ago, and they're being allowed to just basically go back to being dirt roads. And it does affect the lifespan of your car. Of course, the whole model is that every 5 years you buy a new car anyway, so it's not really a big deal. But the roads out here in Hawaii are absolutely atrocious. We have, according to the U.S. Department of Transportation, before their website shut down, Hawaii had the worst roads in the entire nation. Somebody over at UH did a study and said the average Hawaii driver will spend $600 a year just replacing damage done to their car, driving on these roads with the gigantic potholes because they weren't laid properly to begin with gravel drainage and the appropriate ways to line a road. I mean, contrast that with the Autobahn in Germany. Parts of that were built before World War II, and they're still working absolutely well. And I have another idea for all you state governments who want to take back control of those national parks. I'm sure right now your prisons are filled with people who were there for growing or harvesting marijuana, and I'm sure they'd love a chance to get out there into the national parks and start taking care of the place. And these people already know how to care for plants. It is simply withholding from you your own property to allow the government to get a new credit card. I put a cartoon up on whatreallyhappened.com in response to the story about how the Treasury Department says if we don't raise the debt ceiling, it'll be a catastrophe. And I put it in the context of a husband and a wife, and the wife has maxed out all the husband's credit cards, and she's saying, if you don't give me a new credit card, it'll be a catastrophe. And that's exactly how childish it is. There shouldn't be a national debt of this scale. And there would not be had we not been sold into the slavery of the private central banks. It's time for it to go, and it's time for Americans to realize none of us alive today had anything to say about the passage of the Federal Reserve Act. When they passed the Federal Reserve Act 100 years ago, they were all saying, well, we'll all have money to play with now, and the future will have to take care of the problem. Well, we're that future, and it's not our problem. Now, getting on to Obamacare. Apparently, the government has revised downward by one order of magnitude their claim for how many people were attempting to sign up on this botched computer system. And that was the big excuse. The reason there were so many problems, it's so popular, everybody's signing on, and turned out that not as many people were trying to sign on. It's just a botched, screwed-up system, and they're having to pull back on that. We know we're getting reports from the state exchanges of maybe 1% to 5% of the people logging into the system are actually enrolling once they see what the huge cost and high deductible of these Obamacare-compliant health insurance policies is actually going to be. And even worse, the system really isn't working. Apparently, 99% of the Obamacare applications can't be processed. They've just gone out into cyberspace someplace. They can't find them. And that was one of the things the programmers said was going to happen 2 weeks ago when they were warning this was not ready for launch. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're talking about Obamacare and what a Charlie Foxtrot that has turned out to be. We're getting all these horror stories coming out now that people have actually tried to sign on. The healthcare website itself, the national one, got taken down over the weekend for repairs. This thing was not ready to launch. I mean, I don't care how drunk they are inside Washington, D.C., this was not ready to go. And this idea that America is going to blame the Republicans over Obamacare is nonsense. If the Democrats thought this was such a win-win, then why did Obama delay many of the mandates till after next year's elections? So we're hearing that people can't log in. They're getting the wrong premium calculations. Now we're hearing that 99% of the records are virtually unusable. It's just amazing here. Let me just do that real quick. Okay, now there have been a flood of very angry comments all over the social media, especially Facebook, about the failings of the system, the very high premiums, the very high deductibles. We were talking about one case last week, where somebody logged in, and they make you fill out all your information first before they will tell you what it is you have your choice of buying. And so this guy went through and he found out he was going to be paying about $500 a month for insurance with a $14,000 deductible. So he hit opt out and immediately got an email threatening him with a $4,000 fine for not moving forward. Now, there's already an organization saying, I will not comply with Obamacare. They got a Facebook page. The anger is building. 71% of Americans, as of the last poll, and by the way, that was taken before this computer system launched with all of its problems. So I'm going to say it's probably even higher now. But 71% of Americans are opposed to Obamacare. We're going to take a phone call here. Jim in Illinois. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Good to hear you. I enjoy listening to your show, man. Gives me you got a really clear perspective, I think, on some of the current issues. Anyway, I was listening to Freedom Link or Freedom Radio over the weekend, and they were thinking that part of the manipulations that are being performed by the federal government with the federal lands might be tied in some way to Agenda 21. Now, I'm not familiar enough with Agenda 21 to know any difference, but
well, you're absolutely correct in that under Agenda 21, eventually the United Nations is supposed to be in control of all these national parks, World Heritage Sites, and so forth, and they've already managed to acquire a lot of it. In fact, if you go to a lot of our U.S. national parks, they'll say, this is an official UNESCO site. But again, right, because those national parks are the common heritage of the American people, the federal government does not actually have either the moral right or the authority to take land away from the American people and give it to what is being hyped as the future global government.
Yeah, really, it's what I'm getting at, man. And I sure would hate to see anything break out into any real violent things. But when push comes to shove, these individuals, man, they may perpetrate violence against the people en masse. You can tell already that they could really give a rat's butt about us, the people of these United States of America, and it's just we gotta maintain our vigilance there, man.
You're absolutely correct, and it gets back to this whole Obamacare thing where the Democrats are out there saying, we care about your health, we want you to have health care, even though it's the most expensive in the world and 30th in quality. If this government really cared about the health of the American people, they wouldn't be fighting tooth and nail to block investigations into the toxic side effects of vaccine adjuvants. They wouldn't be fighting tooth and nail to conceal the presence of genetically modified organisms in the food that we eat. Everyone's always screaming about the 40 million Americans who don't have health care coverage. It's the same 40 million who are on food stamps. I think everybody wants health care coverage. If you want health care coverage for all Americans, bring back those high-paying manufacturing jobs that allow the American people to pay for all this stuff. Don't just sit out there and say, you must buy this and you must buy that, when we do not have the money to comply.
I call my reps quite regularly, and the thing is there's a young aide, one of mine, a Congresswoman Bustos, but she had no idea about Fukushima poisoning the food chain of the Pacific, quite possibly ruining our soil for the crops that are grown in California. And what else was I getting to? But anyway, I took my time to explain some things to this young person, that the United States of America was at one time self-sufficient until we got into all these insane trade agreements, man. And now, it's like we're not self-sufficient. It's like you said, the manufacturing jobs, the industrial jobs, man, it's just, I don't get it. It just
if you think about it, here's where that got going, okay? When you have a little tiny town surrounded by farmland and the people are able to basically trade their food and whatever else they're making back and forth, they don't have a middleman. And the middleman can't sit there in the middle making profit off of other people's work. But when you have the food being grown in this time zone and then shipped over to this other time zone for storage and then shipped into another time zone for distribution into the markets for sale, then all those people sitting on the middle are making fortunes off of other people's productivity. And then now they're trying to basically impose that on a global system. So that if the entire world is dependent on this one country for food and this other one country for electronics and this third country for automobiles and this fourth country for appliances, it ties the system so much together in interdependence that it's hard for anybody to break free. And that's the political reason for all of this, creating these giant sectors across the globe that each has only one thing that they do in order to force that interdependence. And it just basically creates a situation where the warehousers, the middlemen, are reaping huge fortunes off of other people's work. And that's another reason why I'm very much opposed to globalism. I think what is the best course for humanity and planet Earth is regionalism, 1,000 little tiny countries, each taking care of their own and uniting together only when one country falls under some kind of a megalomaniac dictator, which does happen with alarming regularity, and they need to slap him down. But this whole globalism thing is all about enforcing profits to these giant transnational corporations.
That doesn't happen. We're going to continue to be held hostage, man, and that's the way I feel.
Because it's all rooted in that private central banking scam. It has to collapse eventually, and we, the people of planet Earth, need to be prepared mentally and logistically to move forward into new regional governments and absolutely adamant that no public currency will be borrowed at interest from privately owned central banks ever, 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 ever again. This happened before in history. That is why the early Christians forbade usury. That's why Muslims forbid usury. They saw what it did to these ancient cultures, and because they were dealing with populations that were not literate and not trained to think analytically and rationally, they put the prohibition against usury as part of the religious dogma to try and warn future generations against ever allowing this scam to happen again. And we didn't listen, and here we are. We'll be back after Phyllis Shapley and some commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about Obamacare. Now, you probably remember the name Henderson, guy by Chad Henderson, 21-year-old student from Georgia, got himself a lot of press coverage last week for being one of the few, the proud, the brain damaged to successfully sign up for insurance through a federal health care exchange. And he was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the Chattanooga Times, Free Press, Huffington Post, Enroll America, and Politico, along with several TV appearances. And he was being held aloft as proof that despite all the glitches and problems, the new health insurance exchanges were working after all, and it turns out his story is a complete fabrication. And it turns out that this Chad Henderson was a volunteer for President Obama's campaign last year, and his LinkedIn page still lists him as an active volunteer with Organizing for Action, which is the former Obama campaign organization, which has now transitioned into advocating for the president's legislative agenda. And he came out there and he said, I want Obamacare to succeed. And all those corporate media outlets who carried his story did not fact-check his claims. Going to take a phone call here. Obi in Colorado. Aloha, Obi. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, I wanted to talk about something slightly different, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I went through a police abuse case. I'm on one of these medical alert things where if you push the button, help comes, because I have a lot of health problems. And Saturday night, the thing went off an hour and a half after I went to bed, and supposedly it went off again, and the people called, and the next thing we know, we've got a cop banging on our door in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I told him who I was, and I told him I'm okay, I'm who you were checking for, and he goes, I need to see some identification. I said, look, I'm not going to show you my ID because I don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you I am who I am, I'm okay. And he started to walk in the house. I said, I'm coming in your house. And I said, no, you can't. I put my hand up like, stop, He ran into my hand. The next thing you know, he throws me onto the floor. He's got his knee in the back of my neck, which I have spinal cord damage, and I had surgery there. And then about 10 minutes later, there's 8 cops in my house searching my house.
Mm-hmm.
And, no warrant, no probable cause. I didn't commit any crimes. They were supposedly coming out for a wellness check because my health meter went off.
Yeah.
And
that's a real problem with those systems. When my wife and I were still living in Kaneohe, we had a burglar alarm system that unfortunately was designed to only be powered by these batteries you can only buy from Israel that were supposed to last 6 months, and they only lasted a few weeks. And this thing kept doing the battery low warnings at like 2 in the morning and waking my wife and I up, and it was just insane. And when we moved, we left the alarm, that particular alarm, behind us. I'm going to come back to your story here in a little bit, but over the weekend I was watching one of the Top Gear episodes where Jeremy Clarkson had waited for 2 years to have this top-of-the-line Ford supercar delivered to him. Was supposed to be available in 1 year, dragged on to 2. First time he tried to drive it home from work, start button wouldn't work. The engine immobilizer had malfunctioned, and he just went on and on about this story about he kept having to take it back to the local Ford dealership to get it repaired. It kept reporting the car was stolen to the authorities. It kept sending him text messages. He's driving to work at Top Gear, and he's getting these text messages every 15 minutes warning your car has been stolen. America has just fallen completely in love with all these computerized security systems, and they don't really work very well. In fact, they're probably written by the same people who wrote that Obamacare software package, the lowest bidder. And it does lead to misunderstandings. Now, I'm sure a lot of people are going to say it would have been just easy to show your ID to the police officer because he was doing the wellness check. But, yeah, in the current United States, the police definitely are being indoctrinated with an attitude of throw them on the ground first and ask all questions later.
Well, the point is I'm bringing up a case in Brown versus the state of Texas where the Supreme Court ruled that people did not have to do that because it's a violation of your Fifth Amendment rights of self-incrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did, and finally they had a police lieutenant showed up, and he goes, if you don't show me your ID right now, I'm going to put you in jail for 3 days.
Mm-hmm. On what
and
grounds?
My thing is, he didn't say. He said just because I'm refusing to cooperate. And what I want to do is get my, if anybody here in Colorado can give me some information on a constitutional attorney, I want to file a civil lawsuit on this.
Okay, I don't want you to give out your name or identifying information on the air, but I'll tell you what. If any constitutional attorney in Colorado wants to email me their website, I will post it at whatreallyhappened.com, and then you can find it and you can contact them directly, okay?
Okay, thank you. But it was absolutely insane. I mean, they were illegally searching my house. And they automatically assume, when I told them who I was, but they automatically assume you're lying. And the first thing they did when they got my license was to run a criminal background check to see what I'd done wrong.
Well, they were looking for something they could use to retroactively justify what they had just done to you. Oh, he's a dangerous criminal, we've got to take him away. Because obviously, I think the public reaction to this is going to be, again, the police overreacting. It was just a malfunction of that medical alert system that you're wearing. And the police completely overreacted to it, like they did at the D.C. driver, and they're trying to cover up for that one.
Well, I want to pursue legal action on this, and I thank you for hearing me out, but I feel very much like I've been violated, and I'm not safe in my own home anymore.
Welcome to the club. We've got 330 million violated Americans right now, and they're getting very, very angry about that. Obi, we're going to let you go here because we're coming up on a commercial break, and I want to get back to Obamacare. We got a few more points to hit about that. We're seeing all these stories showing up about how this latest survey is showing 83% of U.S. doctors are actually considering abandoning their practices over the Obamacare, over all the added paperwork, over all the complexity, over all the government tinkering with the decisions on what is the best care to give the patient. Now remember, Obamacare added something like 16,000 IRS agents to enforce it, but they didn't have provision to add a single doctor, and now we have doctors saying they're getting ready to quit. We have another story at whatreallyhappened.com about how some doctors are transitioning their practices to a cash-only basis, where you will come in and they will take care of what's wrong with you and you will pay in cash directly, no insurance companies at all. This may actually lower costs because, if as we mentioned last week, these insurance companies work out these deals with medical providers for giant discounts. And in order to still make money, this forces the medical establishments to raise their prices. And this is one of the reasons why medical treatments here in the United States of America are 5 to 10 times as expensive as in places like Canada. It's that uplift to make sure that the insurance companies are still going to pay enough money to cover the medical costs, but at the same time uninsured customers are getting hit with that 10 to 20 times uplift walking in the door. Well, if a doctor is running his practice on a cash-only basis, he doesn't need to do that uplift. And their prices for treatment are going to fall back down to what the market will bear. And I think that's a really good thing to have happen. Now, there's an article out here, Obamacare subjects the entire nation to ransom demands of coercive government. And I'll tell you what's really going on with this thing. Obama's refusal to compromise or delay Obamacare is more than mere political grandstanding. Obama has to prove he can continue to make the payments on the government debt in order that the Federal Reserve and others will go on increasing that debt ceiling. Now, when we come back from this commercial break, we're going to look at the numbers about how much revenue Obamacare is going to add to government coffers. And that is the reason they're refusing to delay this. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want you to think about some numbers here. Going from that story that surfaced last week about the guy who tried to sign up for Obamacare, gave them all his information, and then was presented with a choice of insurance policies, all of which had monthly premiums of $500 and a deductible in the tens of thousands. At which point he opted out, at which point he got threatened with a $4,000 fine. So, $500 a month is $6,000 per year times 200 million complying Americans, because we know they're all not going to sign on to this thing, so let's cut it down. That's $1.2 trillion a year in pure profit pouring into the health insurance companies. Because for the vast majority of Americans, your yearly medical costs aren't going to come up to that deductible, which means you're paying for all your medical care all by yourself. Only in the event of a major medical catastrophe will you exceed the deductible, and the health insurance companies grudgingly chip in to cover the costs. So it's basically $1.2 trillion a year in pure profit pouring into the health insurance companies, which is why they were lobbying so hard for this. Plus, that will give the U.S. government, under the current corporate tax rates, $200 billion a year in new tax revenues, plus the IRS fines on those who refuse to sign up. And that is why Obama is demanding Obamacare move forward now, despite a totally botched up computer management system and despite 71% and growing public opposition. Absent that new revenue flow, the U.S. government can't finance an increase in the debt ceiling and will collapse. And that one-year delay proposed by the House of Representatives is far too long for this government to survive its debt crisis without finding some new source of loot from the American people. And they can't come out and just start grabbing it, because 80% of Americans own a firearm right now. Now, needless to say, the one part of Obamacare that seems to be working smoothly and efficiently are all the scammers who are leaping into the fray, setting up bogus, phony websites, luring people in with websites with the domains are one spelling mistake away from the official ones. Or they're calling up homes and claiming to be an official Obamacare navigator, and they're there to help you enroll in Obamacare, and it's identity theft, because you're turning over all this information, and it doesn't go into the healthcare.gov computers, or even if it did, it's going to get lost, and it's just another scam. Obamacare, like the NSA spying, has opened up the American people to crimes by criminals, and they consider it a small price to pay to achieve the real ends of Obamacare, which is that $200 billion plus in additional revenues every year to try and float this little Ponzi scheme along until somebody else is in office and they get to go down in the history books for having crashed the entire system. But the crash of this system has been happening in slow motion for 100 years. And it goes back to that corrupted Congress and that corrupted president who sold us all back into the same economic slavery we fought a revolution to be free of. Now, there's a story that's been floating around over the weekend. And it was sent to me several times, and I did not post it because it really didn't make a lot of sense. And it was a claim that Obama was offering to allow a Muslim museum to open using funds from his own pocket. Well, in theory, under the presidential blind trust, Obama doesn't really have a lot of money in his own pocket. It's over in the blind trust, although we know since the Clinton years, presidents fudged that. And it turned out the story originated as a parody, and it got a lot of traction all over the net, and apparently Fox News actually carried it as a story before they realized they'd fallen victim to this parody. So you've got to be very careful what's floating out there. The propagandists are apparently back on the government clock, and they're out there just trying to throw as much junk and noise out there to deter the formation of a popular public consensus. Now, transitioning from Obamacare into the economy as a whole, and we forecast this was going to happen. Forbes is now reporting that U.S. scientists are leaving the United States of America and taking America's ability to innovate and develop new technologies with them. The brain drain is underway. Our best, most creative, intelligent scientists, I'm not talking about the ones who just sold out to the global warming agenda and kicked back and enjoyed the money, but real scientists who got into science to develop new technologies, they're seeing their funding dry up, they're seeing their support from their educational institutions drying up, and they're just saying, all right, we're going to head for greener pastures, and the other nations around the world are welcoming Americans with technical skills and knowledge to build up their economies. And it basically means that right now the United States is not only in serious government-induced financial disaster, but because of government tax incentives, not only is our manufacturing leaving for other countries, but our ability to develop new technologies and new products to revive that manufacturing are leaving just as well. It's very short-sighted thinking. And part of the curse, part of the problem of the federal government is these people aren't thinking what's good for the nation as a whole. They're completely oblivious. They're surrounded by handlers and staff who are as compromised to the lobbying organizations as the politicians themselves. And all they think from sunup to sundown is, what can I do to get me more money? What can I do to get me more power? That's all they ever think about. And nobody's thinking about what's really best for the nation as a whole. It's pushing the Wall Street agenda, pushing the Israeli agenda, pushing the war agenda. That's all they think about. Because that's what they're paid to do, with all these generous campaign donations and various other inducements, both above and below table. Now, over at Lyndon LaRouche's website, he's reporting that in the middle of this government shutdown and negotiations over the debt ceiling, Wall Street is once again trying to exact a promise from Barack Obama to kill Glass-Steagall. Now, you know, Glass-Steagall was originally passed in the 1930s because it was the merger of depositor banks and investment banks that led to the excesses that caused the crash of 1929. Glass-Steagall was repealed in the United States in 1999, and promptly the investment banks and the depositor banks merged, went right back to the same reckless behavior that led to the crash of 2008. And we've been hearing in Congress time and time again. It's time to reinstate Glass-Steagall, and Wall Street is in the White House and on Capitol Hill, checkbook in hand, saying, absolutely not. We love a world without Glass-Steagall because, hey, we're making billions and billions of dollars by doing God's work, as Lloyd Blankfein likes to put it. And apparently, there was a delegation that went to the White House organized by 19 of the largest banks and insurance companies, and included Jamie Dimon, who CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, although he's stepping down now, Lloyd Blankfein, who's doing God's work over at Goldman Sachs, Brian Moynihan, CEO of Bank of America, Michael Corbett, CEO of Citibank, Anshu Jain, CEO of Deutsche Bank. And they're all over there saying, oh, no, we don't want Glass-Steagall. We want the leashes off. We want the chains released so that we are free to predate on the people of planet Earth, because that is what our imaginary playmate in the sky says we're supposed to be doing. Meanwhile, over at the most recent Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, it is very clear that China is on the ascendancy. And the U.S. has kind of been sidelined, because the U.S. is just out there screaming, debt, borrow, debt, borrow, debt, borrow, please use the dollar, please go back to the petrodollar, please go back to Bretton Woods. And China's out there saying the world has moved beyond Bretton Woods, and the rest of the world, they are listening. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go to the phones. Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I think that everything that you said about why Obama has to have this passed now as far as, funding for the debt is very much true. But I also think that we need to have Obamacare in place very soon, because we are starting to see the economy come apart at the seams. And Obamacare is a big part, it's probably one of the biggest parts of the, command and control system that there is. The Obamacare coupled with the NDAA pretty much gives the government the ability to do whatever the heck they want to do.
Well, only if we, the people, are willing to go along with it. And I think what we're seeing here in the United States is that people aren't willing to go along with it. In fact, I got an email from somebody talking about a gathering some people had on a national park site, and they found the restrooms had been boarded over. Now, somebody spent money to do that. They didn't just walk away and say, we're not working anymore. They spent money, wood, nails, whatever, to board it over. The people took the boards down to use the restrooms, and by the end of the day, they had police and a work crew permanently stationed there, keeping the place boarded up. They're actually spending more money to keep these parks closed than it took to keep them open in the first place. And again, it's just all theater.
Well, Obama's really showing his behind with this shutdown. I mean, it's evident to people that he's being spiteful, he's being vindictive, and he's doing everything in his power to make the lives of American people who don't have a dog in this fight, really. They're not the ones voting and shutting down the government, but they're the ones who are paying the price for the shutdown. These people in government, I mean, the senators, the congressmen, they really, it doesn't affect them too much. Their day-to-day life, they don't really care about going to see monuments and that kind of stuff. They're in there to make money. They're in there to take from you.
They're all getting their paychecks. They're all getting their paychecks. Yeah. Now, some of their staffers are on furlough, so those poor members of Congress are having to answer their own telephones. Actually, just put them through to voicemail. Because they don't want to hear. Don't want to listen to you hoi polloi anyway. You're not saying anything they want to hear because there isn't a dollar sign in front of it.
And one more thing on the Obamacare computer systems and all the problems that they're having. I'm sure you heard about the release of Grand Theft Auto 5. Well, on October 1st, that game went online, meaning that you could play with a bunch of people online. Mm-hmm. And the first 2 days it was online, major problems with it. No one could get online. The servers were all screwed up because of the incredible. I think it was 25 million people tried to get online in one day and do it. Mm-hmm. That was October 4th. Today, the system runs perfectly, without a problem, without a fault. So it goes to show you the difference between the public and the private sector. When there's motivation behind it, and there's people are going to not buy my products, not use my product.
Well, when they were first screaming about how all the problems were proof of how popular Obamacare was, I pointed out, Google is popular, but when you type in a search request, you don't get a message saying you'll get your search results next February.
Absolutely. I mean, this entire debacle is, from the shutdown to the health care to everything, is not doing anything for Obama's public image. If anything, his approval level, I believe, is at an all-time low at this point. And, I don't know what the guy's thinking, to be quite honest with you.
Well, I think Obama's approval and that of Congress are at all-time lows as well, and they're out there trying to get their pet polling agencies to come out with some numbers that look somewhat survivable, but even the most pro-Obama polling agencies are coming out with lousy numbers. They're still trying to claim almost half of America supports him, but of course when we run our own polls at whatreallyhappened.com, approval for the entire federal government is down in the single digits.
Oh, well, and, they run polls with questions like, do you approve of a Congress? That there should be a functioning body,
Yeah, it's push polling. It's push polling. If you had your choice between, Ceausescu and Obama, which would you take? And they'd say, oh, let me think about that a minute. All right, Obama. And that's how they're getting these numbers.
Absolutely. There are no winners in this situation, though. And there's one thing that I'm certainly seeing from the shutdown and whatnot is that there are no winners. There's nothing that anybody is gaining from this because everybody looks terrible.
Oh, I disagree.
What do you think?
The American people are the winners because they're getting angry and they're seeing this government for what it truly is. And all of this tantrum throwing and closing of the parks and monuments are waking the American people up even faster than they were before.
Well, and in that section, you're absolutely right, because if anything, it's showing that when the government wants to oppress or wants to make your life difficult or wants to shut down certain things, the ability and the length to which they're willing to go to get what they want. That is something that I think is absolutely coming from this shutdown.
Well, as I said earlier in the show, we've hit that stage in history where everything the government does to try and control the American people only shows that it's losing control and angers the American people even more. And there's really no way to turn around from this point short of drastic out-of-the-box action like shutting down the Federal Reserve, writing off all that debt, admitting to all the previous lies and deceptions and saying, look, give us one more chance and we promise we'll be straight with you. And even then, I don't think that'll work.
Well, me and my brother went for an overnight camping trip this past weekend in a national park that was supposedly closed. We drove up there. There was nobody in the booth. When we actually got back to the campsite, every campsite was full. Now, there are certain places where, campers like to plug in and get power. They weren't on. But people are just disobeying. People are just saying, I don't care if you're here or not here. I'm going to camp. I'm going to do what I want to do.
This whole shutdown thing has triggered massive amounts of civil disobedience, and it's making civil disobedience socially acceptable and indeed even popular.
Well, it's a rallying cry. It's a certain, we essentially paid for all this stuff. We pay for the upkeep. We put the money in your pocket. If you're not going to show up for work, that's fine, great. But we're going to do what we're going to do because theoretically it's ours.
That's exactly right. Not in theory. It is ours. Those public lands, those monuments and parks belong collectively to we the people. The government is just the janitor that we hired to keep the trash bins empty. And they don't have an authority to lock us out of our own public lands because we won't go along with enslaving future generations of Americans to unpayable debt.
I think it's impressive that American people are picking up on that. I think, I wouldn't have thought that they would have been able to say, if there's a sign there that says, no, don't walk on the grass, 90% of people don't walk on the grass. But in this case, people are saying, no, that's my grass. I'm going to walk wherever I want to walk, and you got a problem with it. Take it up with 330 million of us. Yeah. And I also think the majority of the government workers, they're also American citizens, and they want to have access to these, parks, recreations, and services that they paid for. So I think in that sense, it's a double team. It's a back and forth with each other.
Well, I know one of the worst mistakes that the U.S. government made in all this shutdown nonsense was closing those PXs and commissaries on the military bases. Because, like I said, we were at Sam's over the weekend. It was just filled with military people, and they were happy to have someplace to go buy, their groceries. But they seemed very, very angry at the inconvenience. And right now, Obama really should not be angering the rank-and-file military any more than they already are.
Well, and it's amazing. I was talking this weekend. You don't see Obama out there, throwing out the first pitch in the playoffs in baseball. You don't see him out there at NFL, games because he knows the reaction that he's going to get. He knows what it's going to, what people think of him.
Yeah,
and he's doing
they're going to be booing
power.
And jeering him, and, it's going to sort of redefine the term swearing-in ceremony, where Obama's up there and the American people are saying, you, such and such.
They did it with Bush. His last year, he went and he threw out a ball, and, if you go back and see that video, he was booed for about 4 minutes. He was just unrelentingly hounded on by the people, and that's the same exact reaction that Obama's going to get.
Yeah, and, we've already caught the corporate media several times where Obama's out there in public and he's saying things, and you can hear where they're taking down the live mic and putting up an applause cheering track. Because whoever's on the audio board doesn't understand the principle of a crossfade.
Well, and I'm doubling back to the Obamacare thing, I am very surprised that you're not seeing, Brad Pitt out there signing up for Obamacare or some sort of celebrity endorsement. That's got to be right around the corner.
Oh, they're already trying to do that, and you know something? Nobody's paying attention because, hey, they're movie actors. It's not like they actually know anything about government and economics. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're seeing... I want to get back to this D.C. shooting. They're running it again on Fox News, and the sisters of the victim, Miriam Carey, have gone public. First of all, one of her sisters is a former New York police officer herself, and said this is not the way these things are supposed to be handled. There was no reason to kill Miriam. And the sisters have come out and they've revealed a couple of things. First of all, that Miriam was shot running away from the police. She was not presenting a credible threat. They simply gunned her down. And apparently, what happened to her is so bad, the family is not being allowed to see the body of Miriam Carey. They're being told, no, you may not look at it. The D.C. police are saying, no, you may not look at it. There's nothing there that you need to see. Now, a witness has come forward confirming earlier reports that the police had removed the child from the car while the mother, Miriam Carey, was still very much alive. And then as she ran from the scene, that's when they shot her. And there's no reason for them to have to do that. What happened to those shotgun tasers or those beanbag guns that they spend so much of our tax dollars on? Now, the sisters have also revealed another very interesting fact. Last week we confirmed that Miriam Carey was suffering postpartum depression. She was on prescription antidepressants, and at the time of her shooting, her doctor was trying to withdraw her from the medication. And if you go over to ssristories.com, you will read that it is when you are coming off these medications, when you're cutting down, or worse, going cold turkey, that is the time you are most at risk of a sudden, violent psychological episode involving violence or suicide. And so we had the worst possible confluence of circumstances. This young woman was withdrawing from prescription psychiatric medication that put her in a very fragile mental state. The police are still out there saying terror threat, terror threat. There had been the Navy Yard shooting and the shutdown made us weak and 9/11, and they're trying to wave that all over. They're still trying to claim that Miriam Carey rammed a barricade at the White House, even though photos of Miriam Carey's car immediately after her being shot show no major damage to the front of the car, and the airbags have not deployed. She may have bumped something. We also know that there was, in fact, an anti-terror drill taking place at the exact same time. And so the possibility exists that what was going on is the Secret Service and the Capitol Police were already geared up for this anti-terror drill, and Miriam Carey blundered into it, pulled into the White House parking lot driveway to turn around, and the Secret Service said, "Oh, this is the terror drill." And they all had blanks in their guns, which explains why Miriam Carey got out of the White House grounds without being shot. Because either those Secret Service guns had blanks or they're all lousy shots. And she drove away to the Capitol building. She was trying to get away. She had no idea why she was being shot at. And yeah, if you're just trying to turn around in traffic and all of a sudden people with guns are shooting at you, yeah, I'd hit the gas pedal too. And so would you. And so she gets up to the Capitol building. They try and corral her in. They finally get her pulled over. They had her stopped. They took the baby out of the back of the car. And apparently she panicked and ran under the withdrawal from the SSRIs, and they just shot her in the back. And now the D.C. police are trying to say, terror threat. We were reasonable. Absolutely, we had every reason to fear that this Infinity with a mother in the front and the baby in the back could have been a baby of mass destruction. There could have been biological weapons in that diaper. And they gunned her down, and now they're refusing the family permission to look at the body of the mother. Apparently, they're not even allowing the baby to be given back to family. Meanwhile, down in Florida, remember Ibrahim Todashev? He was the witness to the Boston bombing, indirectly, who was basically interrogated and coerced by the FBI for hours and hours and hours, trying to get him to sign a confession that he knew that the accused Boston bombers were also involved in this drug-related murder in order to demonize them and stop people from saying, hey, there's a lot of funny stuff going on about Boston. Well, apparently the girlfriend of Ibrahim Todashev is now being held in solitary confinement for daring to allow herself to be interviewed by the press. And now they're going to deport her, get her out of the country. They don't want anybody talking to her. They've got her in solitary confinement, and they're going to get her out of the country. Because it looks like the FBI was trying to coerce this guy into signing a false confession. He refused, started to leave, and the FBI, realizing he was going to go to the media and say, look, the FBI is trying to get me to sign phony confessions, they just killed him. Now, this coming weekend, there are a lot of protests and demonstrations happening all across the country. And a lot of it centers on the truckers' ride to restore the Constitution, where thousands of truckers are planning on abandoning their trucking routes, mostly on the eastern seaboard, so you want to have some extra groceries in the house this end of this week. And they're going to drive through Washington, D.C., calling for the restoration of a constitutional republic. And now we are hearing that there's going to be parallel, simultaneous protests where veterans are converging on Washington, D.C., angered over the closure of the war memorials. And apparently the bikers are going to come back to Washington, D.C. in support of the truckers. And there's going to be banners hanging off the top of the freeway overpasses saying, impeach Obama, impeach the Congress, impeach the entire government. And anything you can do to support them, even if it means a sign just in your living room window saying, I support the truckers' strike. You need to get out there. And I'm not asking for anybody to engage in any violence. I have no doubt there's going to be all kinds of government-paid agent provocateurs trying to turn the protest violent so the media can say, oh, those truckers and those bikers and those veterans, how violent they are, and you shouldn't pay attention to their message. But this weekend is a wonderful opportunity for all 330 million American people to stand up, be visible, and shout to the rest of the world. We do not support what this central government is doing. We do not support private central banking. We are not the wallets of last resort for Wall Street's crimes and corruptions. We know this government is lying about Iran's nuclear weapons, Syria's gas weapons, just like they lied about Iraq's nuclear weapons. We do not support these wars. We don't support anything this government is doing. They are no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. They are a government of the money junkies, by the money junkies, and for the money junkies, and they're lifespan has expired. Their shelf life is over. We need a cash for clunkers program for the government, where we take our current inefficient, bloated, junked up government, we take it over to the trash yard, we put it in that little machine that crunches it up and sends it over to the recycling place, and we get a check for $4 or $5 trillion to go out and buy a brand new, highly efficient, less costly government. That's what we need here. Going to take a phone call. Kent in Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, the thing that I noticed about this lady that she came out with she didn't come out with it, but people around her came out with a story that was so similar to the guy in the Navy Yard about being communicated with, through the walls, or she was being communicated with. They sounded almost identical, and I thought that was kind of odd,
Well, you need to understand right now that the big pharmaceutical corporations that are selling these drugs, and it's a huge moneymaker because 20% of all Americans are now taking these medications. And the pharmaceutical companies are absolutely adamant that Americans will not realize that a significant portion of people on these medications are driven to violence and suicide by them, just like Monsanto is adamant that you will never find out about the risks from GMO crops, just like the pharmaceutical industries are also adamant you will never find out about the hazards of the adjuvants put in vaccines. And so obviously they're going to come out and say, oh, they were metal, they were crackers, they were listening to space aliens, they mind control radio waves in their brains and stuff like that to try and clutter up the discussion. But again, we know these prescription antidepressants have a long and well-documented history of causing these problems. Better than 90% of the mass shootings waved at us by the gun grabbers involved shooters who were on or withdrawing from these medications. It's right there in front of us, and they're trying to just throw out all kinds of junk. We got to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 3. And a couple of program notes. Tomorrow, we're going to have Donna Laframboise on our show in the third hour talking about her new book, looking to the inner workings of the IPCC, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has sort of been the focus point of all this screaming about human-caused global warming and how we're all going to die. And their latest thing is, yeah, the Earth isn't warming any, but we're still convinced in the long run we're right, and you've got to buy carbon credits and pay carbon taxes. And by the way, the Black Hills of Dakota just got hit with an all-time record snowstorm. So much for snow was a thing of the past that these guys were saying 10 years ago. And on Thursday, Kevin Barrett will be joining us about his new book, Dynamic Duo. Now, the stock market just closed, and all the plunge protection team horses and all the plunge protection team men couldn't quite get that stock market into the green again. The Dow opened really low. There was a huge upshove. It sort of percolated along, and then just before the closing bell, there was another major downturn. Dow closed now 136, which is not jump out the windows, but at the same time, now that it's closing below 15,000 again, I think a lot of people are going to get very, very nervous. And, of course, the White House is holding out this thing, well, as soon as we raise the debt ceiling, there'll be prosperity for everybody. And, of course, that's complete and utter nonsense. When you raise the debt ceiling, there'll be more debt for everybody. But we're definitely into Orwell speak here. Freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, war is peace, warming is cooling, debt is prosperity. And that's exactly where we are right now. Apparently, a Fast and Furious whistleblower, John Dodson, wrote a book about what was going on with Fast and Furious, which was this program where the same government that absolutely wants you to never have military-style assault rifles was using your tax dollars to buy and give military-style assault rifles, including fully automatic weapons, to their favorite Mexican drug cartel to put down the evil competition. And then, of course, those drugs come back across the border and are used to commit crimes here in the United States of America. But you're not allowed to have the same guns to shoot back at the criminals. Just call your police, and in 20 or 30 minutes, one of them may show up. And if you mouth off to them, they'll throw you on the floor and tase you and pepper spray you for good measure here. And the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms is using their authority, which I didn't think they had under the First Amendment, to block the publication of John Dodson's book. Now, that's prior restraint, and previous Supreme Court decisions have held that that is absolutely illegal. Now, there are exemptions in the field of cryptography, where all books written on the topic of cryptography must be approved by the NSA for publication to make sure there's nothing in there that defeats the NSA spying on you. But in this particular case, there doesn't really seem to be a valid legal ground to block publication of a book about how your government was giving the very same guns they don't want you to have to Mexican drug criminals. Personally, I'm of the opinion this is just a repeat of Iran-Contra. That when those guns go down to the Mexican drug cartels, drugs are coming back across through the same pipeline to be sold to American children, from which the CIA and the BATF and all the insiders profit. We have government-sanctioned drug smuggling in this country. We've had it going all the way back to the founding of the Skull and Bones fraternity at Yale University that was funded with opium money. And we all know about Iran-Contra. We know about Air America during the Vietnam days. The war on drugs is actually a war on the competition's drugs. Our drugs come right across that border without any impediment whatsoever and are sold to your children here. Our entire government is operating like a gigantic organized crime family, including the Federal Reserve Act, which gives to the bankers, a piece of the action of everything Americans do. Go buy a newspaper using that debt currency. The bank's getting a piece of the action because that currency is accruing interest. And what the Federal Reserve did to the American people, Bretton Woods attempted to do to the rest of the world, and the world is now breaking free. Anyway, the reason the BATF is blocking John Dodson's book is they're saying it would have a negative impact on the morale inside the department. So because this book might depress those poor people over at the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, is a reason for the American public as a whole who don't work for the BATF to find out what the BATF has been doing. That, I think, hits a 10 on the lame-o-meter. Now, if those people inside the BATF are feeling down and depressed over the revelation that what their agency is doing isn't particularly nice, hey, have a drink, smoke a cigar, you'll feel better. Now, the National Security Agency is responding to revelations that they were attempting to break the Tor anonymity network by saying we have to have an inside because terrorists and criminals are using it. No, they're not. Real criminals and real terrorists have known for decades the NSA listens to everything. And real criminals and real terrorists have the ability to devise their own encryption system that the NSA will not be able to break. We proved that with our 3 NSA challenges. And I'm working on challenge number 4 right now. This is about keeping watch on you, the American people, you, the law-abiding citizens, because this government is now afraid of you. Because you have awakened to the true nature of what this government is doing. And you're not happy about it. And you have a right not to be happy about it. So this idea that all this NSA spying on the American people, on the law-abiding American citizen, is somehow justified because they need it to find criminals and terrorists is nonsense. The real criminals, the real terrorists have their own encryption systems that the NSA does not have the method to. And we proved that. Now, moving right along here. Over the weekend, there were a couple of dramatic SEAL team raids into other people's sovereign territory that supposedly captured a terror suspect wanted in the 1998 U.S. embassy bombings in East Africa. And apparently the government of Libya, where one of these raids took place, was very upset over the fact that they weren't even told this was happening. And even the U.S. stooges installed by the U.S. after Gaddafi was killed and their state central bank and the gold dinar were destroyed are out saying, you don't come into our country and grab our people. If he's committed a crime, he should be tried here in Libya, in our jurisdiction. So there's already a political backlash over this, and apparently the second raid failed to accomplish anything useful and wound up killing a bunch of people. And we know what was going on. Obama was going to have a couple of victories. We got Just like he tried to do the We Got Bin Laden a few years back that turned out to be a complete hoax. Now we wanted to have a new terrorist mastermind that we got to distract everybody from the shutdown, Obamacare problems, and the rest of it. Didn't work. They're out there wagging the dead Bin Laden. See, we got another terror mastermind, just like Bin Laden when we got him. And we know that was a complete lie. This failed raid into Somalia, I mean, apparently the Somalis kicked the SEALs' ass on this one. And now they're realizing this is actually going to bolster Al-Shabaab in the region, whoever Al-Shabaab is. I personally think it's a rebranding of Al-Qaeda because too many people understand that Al-Qaeda in Arabic slang means a toilet and is a lousy name for a terrorist organization striving to instill fear in the hearts of the great American Satan. So they've rebranded, relabeled, and they're moving forward, but apparently they messed this one up pretty good. Meanwhile, in Syria, the international experts have begun to destroy the Syrian chemical weapons stockpile. The reason for the invasion just evaporated. But, of course, we know the money junkies and the war hawks in Israel still want the invasion to go on because they still want Iran. They have to go all the way. They can't stop now. It's an all-or-nothing deal. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? I can tell you one thing. Obama is trying to spite everybody, even the military. I know you're not really for this, but it just shows the nature of this president.
No, I'm in agreement. I absolutely agree. He's throwing a tantrum is what he's doing.
Well, you know, the thing is, Obama cut off the troops watching football deployed overseas on the Armed Forces Network due to the shutdown. And then this is ridiculous, Mike.
I agree. It is ridiculous.
And I don't really think... And the thing is, he's going to be crowned king nothing if he ain't got an army that is going to fight for him. You know what I mean?
I was making that point earlier in the show. Now is not a time for the central federal government to be angering and annoying the rank-and-file military.
And, you know, it's just the thing is, so I called DirecTV, who I have, and I was asking, can we start a fundraiser just because of, just in case there's another government shutdown? I would like to see. I say we should just buy satellite dishes, send them overseas because they got DirecTV in Afghanistan, and just bypass Armed Forces Network because I was hearing one soldier sitting there telling me they're being tortured by National Public Radio.
Yeah, well, when you're in the military, you're only allowed to listen to the government-approved channels and station. The whole Armed Forces Radio Network is all about controlling what the Army knows so they don't hear anything unfortunate. I don't know if you've ever seen it. There was a Robin Williams film a few years back, more than a few years, called Good Morning Vietnam, and it's based on the real-life adventures of a radio host, Adrian Cronauer, who became quite popular in Vietnam on Armed Forces Radio, and now he's a civilian disc jockey. I forget where he works, but he's still out there doing what he did. And Robin Williams did an absolutely fabulous job on this film, and it really basically showed that conflict between, you know, just how tightly controlled the information flow going to our military is. So it doesn't matter how many satellite dishes we collect. The military high command will never allow those soldiers to have access to any mass communication media that is not passing through government censorship. I understand my website, whatreallyhappened.com, is not visible on any military networks.
Well, I just hope, like I say, I feel it's coming to a breaking point. I mean, I put that thing in there like, don't mess with Texas, because it wouldn't surprise me Obama tried to barricade the Alamo, and I tell you, that would upset a lot of people here. I
think that absolutely would, and in a way, I hope he does try and do it, because that's going to get people angry. I mean, he's got to be on SSRIs, or his staff has to be on SSRIs. The quality of thinking coming out of this White House is not clear. It's not logical, it's not rational, it's not analytical. They keep making stupid mistake after stupid mistake after stupid mistake.
Well, you know, the thing is, if the cabinet had any sanity, or Congress, you know, they would invoke the 25th Amendment.
Yeah, and then we'd have Biden in place. You know, getting rid of Obama isn't going to solve any problems. Putting the blame on the Republicans won't solve any problems. Putting the blame on the Democrats won't solve any problems. It is a systemic problem. It is the system as a whole, that tangled up mess between the federal government, Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and Israel. All of that tangled together is what has cursed this nation.
Well, and you know, the thing is, it's more like the military-industrial complex. I talk to soldiers. They brag about. I hear Alex Jones brag about DARPA doing this and doing that, but they say most of the stuff DARPA and all these military-industrial complex is absolute junk.
It is. It is. I mean, you know, DARPA is the blue sky project, and they've come up with some good things like the Internet. But there's a hideous amount of waste over there, you know, developing sticky sprays and all this other stuff. You know, and basically the attitude is we're going to throw billions of dollars into all these researchers, and if we get one or two things out of it that works, it's money well spent.
Well, and another thing, you're talking about the NSA, you know, and about the criminal justice system. You know, I remember when they would allow 10 guilty people to walk free and jail one innocent person. Now the attitude of the government is we'll jail 100 people, innocent people, just to catch that one guilty person.
Or we'll drone strike 100 people just to get the one suspect we think might have done something bad.
Yeah. Well, have a good day, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to grab Kevin in North Carolina. Kevin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Aloha. Hey, I was wondering if you heard anything or had any information about health insurance companies buying up hospitals. I mean, they're not calling them like Aetna Memorial Hospital, but they're calling like Norvant and names like that.
Well, I have no information about it, but I could understand why it would be an attractive situation. I mean, these health insurance companies are looking at a boost in profits of over $1 trillion, and they've got to bury that money someplace in order to minimize the amount of taxes they're paying on it. Buying up the hospitals gives them control of the pricing, at least as far as their insurance payouts are concerned. And so, yeah, I would think it's probably going to be almost inevitable that that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's what a doctor told me was happening, and the corporate lawyers were, you know, working around a conflict of interest and that kind of thing. But,
well, if you look at my website, whatreallyhappened.com, up at the very, very top banner where it says What Really Happened, there are little quotes that appear there in a rotation, and by irony, the one that came out today, because it's randomly selected by the server. I don't do this. And the quote today is, "We will never have a healthy society so long as disease is a profit opportunity." And that's exactly what's going on right now.
All righty. Thank you, Mike.
Yep. No, they need us to be sick. They need us to be poisoned. If Americans were perfectly healthy people, this entire commercial enterprise would collapse. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Brendan in Wisconsin. Aloha. Brendan, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. I was just on my way to the post office with a money order to send to the Republic snail mail donation location.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. And I was pleased to hear that you're going to have Kevin Barrett on Thursday. And I've known Kevin for quite a few years now, and as well Dr. Jim Fetzer, his partner on that book. And I'm very pleased to see that you reach out to people, unlike other hosts on different networks who kind of view everyone as competition. The cross-pollination is great. So I'm lucky to have them in Madison, as well as you're lucky to have a whole lot of truth tellers in Hawaii. I think Shepard Ambellis is out there and a few other good people. I was wondering if have you ever heard of an author named Mark Passio on natural? He does classes on natural law.
I've heard the name. I'm not that familiar with him.
He does a very good job at boiling down succinctly your natural rights, and his cadence sounds a lot like listening to you. I think a lot of your listeners would like to hear some of his podcasts, and I thought maybe he would make a good guest for you in the future.
All right, well, I'll look into that.
And I'll be sending my donation after your show's over.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm trying to get more and more guests on here, but since I'm my own show booker, along with my own IT department, along with my own janitorial staff, yeah, I wish I could be doing more, but I'm already putting like 12 to 14 hours a day into this whole thing, and I'm not getting as much done as I would like. In fact, I only just found out today that my Alexa tracker on my website was misconfigured, and my Alexa numbers are actually about half of what they really are. So it just takes a while to get through and make all these things work. There's a lot of technical issues dealing with bad software. Anyway, that's my IT complaint soapbox for the day. We're going to take another break for commercials and come back finishing up here about the wars. Bibi Netanyahu is out there still screaming about, oh, you've got to go bomb Iran for us, and the world is saying, we're tired of hearing about that. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And I forgot to mention, Dan the Man is now in the control room for the remainder of our program. Corporate media is finally acknowledging what we've been telling you all along. The vast majority of the federal government is still doing what they do, despite claims of a shutdown. They're just out there shutting down the things that are visible to maximize its psychological impact. And they're not getting the psychological response they were hoping for. People are angry. All right, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Ralph in California. Aloha, Ralph. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. Pleasure again to talk to you. Hey, real quick, just your opinion regarding the end game with Obamacare. What do you think? How the main purpose of that, besides what they say is everybody's free, insurance for everybody, better insurance, whatever. But what do you think is the ultimate end game with that?
It's a cash grab. It's an absolute, complete cash grab because people who are signing on to the enrollment systems are finding out the Obama-compliant insurance is much more expensive than what we have, and the deductibles are sky high. So the vast majority of Americans are going to be forced to buy health insurance for about $500 a month on average, and for the vast majority of Americans, because of those very high deductibles, they will never receive anything back from that insurance plan. They're still paying for their medical care out of their own pocket up to, a major medical crisis. Then, of course, the insurance will grudgingly kick in. But it's a cash grab because it's estimated this is going to generate immediate profits of over $1 trillion for those health insurance companies who will be paying a portion of that to the government as taxes. And the government needs a new revenue stream in order to raise the debt ceiling, because just raising the debt ceiling doesn't mean anything unless you have got you've got lenders willing to loan money to the government, and the only way they're going to get new lenders loaning to the government has to show some way they're going to make the payments on that new debt. And that's why they're pushing for this thing to start now, even though very obviously the infrastructure to support it is nowhere near ready to be used.
Okay, so basically it's just another way to break down the economy or break down the middle class, the people of America.
They're looting everybody on this one. Everybody's getting looted.
Okay. So that's pretty much I just wanted to hear your point of view on that.
Well, you see, there's another point here because the promoters of Obamacare are saying it's time for America to have a social health system like they have, like in countries in Europe. But there's a major, major difference. In countries like France and Norway, where there is a government-run health system, it is run out of the taxes people are paying already. Here, what they're bringing in is your taxes are going to Wall Street and Israel and the war machine, and they're forcing you to pay additional costs for this health system. And again, we have a health system that is so totally destroyed by the profit motive, it is actually more dangerous to the American people than all the gun owners and all the terrorists put together.
Well, I have someone that's they're from Canada, or they live here, but then they go to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And, they get their taxes are high, but at least their insurance is
they
reasonable.
get stuff back for it. They get good roads, good schools, they get health care, they get subsidies for higher education. Same thing in France and Norway and these other countries. Yes, you're paying high taxes, but you're getting something of value back for all that money you put into the government. Here in the United States of America, that tax money you're paying in vanishes into Wall Street, vanishes into the war machine, vanishes into Israel, and you're not getting anything back for that money. So the government turns around and says, you must pay for your advanced education, and we'll give you a nice little loan at interest to pay for it, or you must pay for your increased health insurance, and if you don't come up to the deductible, you're going to have to pay for that. And I think we had a story last week where something like over half of American bankruptcies are caused by the high cost of medical care in this country. And these are people who had medical insurance, who had private insurance, and it still wouldn't cover the medical costs, and they still had to go to declare bankruptcy.
Okay. Well, I see what you're saying, and I appreciate your comments on it.
All right. Thanks.
Well, basically, though, you did mention, and I think it is going to be a backlash, where doctors are going to ask for cash, so it's going to go back the way it used to be.
Yeah, more and more doctors are going to cash-only operations. They will not accept insurance. And again, doctors are actually considering quitting their medical practice because they don't want to have to deal with Obamacare. You know, this is not what they went to medical school for, to just be salesmen and saleswomen for the pharmaceutical industry and government form filler outers. That's not what they went to med school for. I actually had a chance. Thanks a lot for the call. We're going to let you go, Ralph. Just before I made the decision to walk away from film and TV work and devote myself full-time to peace activism and trying to stop the war, I worked very briefly on a show that was being filmed here in Hawaii called Off the Map. And while the show did not do well and it had serious problems with the scripts, I thought the concept was wonderful, because the concept was a bunch of young, just out of medical school doctors who were just right at the start fed up with this whole commercialization and pill pushing and the rest of it, and they decide to basically walk away from the big city hospitals where they were working, and they go out to this third world nation to volunteer and work at this clinic where they get to do what they trained to do, just heal the sick. Repair injuries, just take care of sick people without all the falderall and monetary profitability and constant paperwork that surrounds medicine here in the United States. And I thought that was a great concept, because I know for a lot of Americans, and not just the medical personnel, they went to school with the idea that they were going to come out of school and do something that they loved and just be able to focus totally on that, and not have to worry about all kinds of little parasitic organizations and entities and companies hanging on to make money off of their work. And have this purity of purpose, if you will, in doing what you were doing. And I thought on that basis it was a very strong concept for this show. And I'm sorry the writers mishandled it, and I know they were swamped with production problems here in Hawaii. And they weren't able to put as much focus on the scripts as I would have liked to have seen them do, because I thought it was a wonderful concept. And I hope somebody tries to revive it down the road, because I thought it was a really, really good idea. Now, getting back to the real world. Monday today marks 12 years since the U.S. invaded Afghanistan. We have been at war in Afghanistan longer than we were in World War II, longer than we were in World War I, and with no end in sight. Afghanistan is not called the graveyard of empires for no reason at all. The last military commander to conquer and control all of Afghanistan was Alexander the Great. Every other nation that's gone in there has just poured money and lives and resources for year after year after year, only to have to retreat. Soviet Union, Great Britain, and now the United States. I'm sure the Russians are laughing themselves silly that the U.S. got itself into the same mess the Soviet Union did. We're going to grab another phone call. Fred in Michigan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, earlier you brought up the Great Depression. And I was wondering, Milton Friedman, who won the Nobel Prize as an economist, in '96, he was interviewed by one of the talking heads, and regarding the Great Depression causation, and he said that the Federal Reserve itself caused the Great Depression by contracting the quantity of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 29 to 33. And then he says within only a few weeks, 3 billion vanished. Within a year, 40 billion vanished. and when he goes on to explain, Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, in his book Synagogue of Satan, is that it wound up in the hands of these criminally avaricious financiers, the infamous Wall Street bankster gangsters.
Yes.
And then he goes on to explain how when Hitler came to office, just like I was going to ask you, conflict of interest. Whenever I've heard about justification for whether it's the Afghanistan debacle, Pat Tillman goes over there, and I still say he was murdered, right?
Yes.
I mean, the guy goes over and discovers that, I don't know, I presume his platoon and others were assigned the task.
Okay, Fred, we got to take a break for commercials here. I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to reply to your comments when we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Benjamin Netanyahu's anti-charm offensive to counter Iran's Rouhani is basically resulting in a gigantic yawn of boredom, not only from the people of planet Earth, but from most of the corporate media as well, who are out there trying to make an issue out of Netanyahu's nuclear duck. And even though his most recent appearance at the United Nations did not involve a cartoon bomb or Christmas ornament, I'm not really sure what he was doing, he didn't get any traction on that. And he's out there whining, the world doesn't get it, what a horrible, horrible danger Iran is. Well, Israel's been saying that since 1985, and we're tired of hearing Netanyahu cry wolf or nuclear duck or whatever it is here. And more newspapers are talking about how Israel is losing its clout. And the former wisdom that Israel and the Israeli lobbies in this country were in absolute iron-fisted control of U.S. foreign policy is starting to fade away. May not be valid any longer. And that former reality is now under challenge. And, of course, Netanyahu, raising on a busted flush, has further damaged his own credibility by saying that the illegal Israeli occupations of the West Bank are not the reason for the friction between Palestine and Israel. Because no reasonable person would ever object to Israel stealing their land or shooting their people. And anybody objects to that, you're just being a bunch of anti-Semites. He says the problem comes down to Palestine recognizing Israel as the Jewish state. And there are two problems with that. First of all, Israel still to this very day refuses to draw its official borders. That makes it impossible for Palestine to know what they are agreeing to, because they can say, all right, we recognize Israel as the Jewish state, and Israel draws the borders way out in the hinterland and says, all right, this is now Israel, get out. That's one problem. The second problem is that Israel refuses to recognize Palestine as a Palestinian state. I am certain that Palestine, and they have already said this, Palestine will recognize Israel as the Jewish state exactly 1 second after Israel recognizes Palestine as a Palestinian state, in compliance with the original two-state partition plan put forward by the United Nations. And that is the reason for all the instability and the bloodshed for the last 60 years, this double standard of we have a right to exist but you do not, that we keep hearing from Israel's leadership. Achieving peace in the Mideast is easy. All Israel has to do is grant to others just that it demands for itself a recognition of their right to exist. But as long as Israel persists in this attitude of you must recognize our right to exist and we have no obligation to recognize your right to exist, the problems will continue. And the world recognizes that is the problem. And all these false flag Israeli fake terror attacks blamed on the Palestinians don't work anymore because we recognize that's what Israel's been doing all along. Speaking of Israel and terror, apparently the Iranian cyber warfare commander has been assassinated. And Iran has just arrested 4 nuclear saboteurs that were caught in an act of sabotage at one of their nuclear sites. Gee, I wonder who would do such a thing. Meanwhile, Condoleezza Rice was out there on the talking head shows this last weekend saying, we can't believe the Iranians, we can't trust the Iranians. And I suppose that's fair, because I don't think we can believe or trust Condoleezza Rice. Because after all, on January 23, 2003, Condoleezza Rice wrote in the New York Times that Iraq had nuclear weapons. She lied, she lied, she lied, she lied. So we cannot trust her or believe her today when she says anything about Iran. She's damaged goods. I have no idea why she is still being promoted out there as some kind of an authoritative figure Americans should listen to. Because she's already discredited herself, along with most of the federal government, about Iraq's nuclear weapons. Now, as part of this campaign to try and reignite the war fever with Iran, we have been seeing this so-called timeline of Iran hostility that was put out by Time magazine. And they start their timeline in 1979, when Iran called the U.S. the Great Satan and kicked out the Shah of Iran and took the Iranian, the hostages, the American hostages. Of course, anybody who knows world history knows that the Iran timeline actually goes back to 1953, when the U.S. government, in particular the Central Intelligence Agency, orchestrated the coup that kicked out the democratically elected government of Iran, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who dared suggest that the wealth from Iran's oil should go to the Iranian people. We can't have that kind of thinking in this world. Same reason they were desperate to get Hugo Chavez out. And then, of course, there's also the U.S. support and encouragement for Iraq to go to war against Iran, with chemical and biological weapons supplied by the United States. They even covertly funded Gerald Bull's supergun. And don't forget how the U.S. accidentally shot down Iran Air Flight 665 in 1988, killing all 290 passengers and crew on board. That's what's missing from the Iran timeline. Time magazine is trying to sell out this thing. They're bad, they're evil, they're the only ones doing anything wrong here. And that is simply not true. Now, the corporate media is dying on the vine because Americans are realizing there's nothing but lies coming out of the corporate media. They're lying about everything except the sports scores and the weather, and they're not even getting the weather all that accurate because they're still out there trying to push this whole human-caused global warming thing. In fact, on one of the reports about this record snowstorm that just hit the Dakotas, they had the paragraph at the end, because of global warming, this snow will melt rapidly and there could be flooding. As a result, CNBC now has its lowest rated quarter in the last 20 years. In the demographic of 25 to 54-year-olds, which is the major demographic, they've got 38,000 viewers per month. I'm sorry, 38,000 viewers per day for that month. We have almost that many readers at whatreallyhappened.com, and we're not spending millions and millions of dollars on studios and lights and fancily coiffed and dressed handsome people, beautiful people. Nobody likes a liar. And that's why the American public are turning away from the corporate media and they're coming over here to the independent media. And because of a software glitch I only recently discovered, I've all of a sudden realized my readership at whatreallyhappened.com is actually a lot more than I thought it was. So welcome aboard, all you new audience here. All right, we're coming up here to the top of the show, and I want to end by going back to that question that you all need to be asking, and the government is terrified that you are asking because they don't have an answer for it. The Constitution gives the U.S. government the authority to create and issue an interest-free public currency, spent into circulation to buy the government what it wants, flowing through commerce without accruing any interest, taxed back in the same amount at the end of the cycle to balance the books and leave zero debt. So why is that government borrowing the public currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? They don't want you asking that question because they don't have a good answer. They did it 100 years ago because the bankers paid them to. And you were sold into the slavery of the very same private central banking scam we fought a revolution to be free of. You need to share this with everyone you know, your social media, Your friends, your family, your coworkers, students, people you run into at the Sam's Club, the military people who are there now. That's the question all America needs to ask. Why is the public currency not a public utility? Why are we running an economic system for the benefit of the private bankers and not for the people in the nation? It's time to ask that question. It's time to demand an answer. Because they've run this scam on this nation for 100 years, and look what it has done to this nation. There's our music. We're going to head on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Again, go over to the RBN website, hit that donate button. We're now on TuneIn. You can download the app for your iPhone, your iPad, your tablets, and listen to us anywhere you want to go. We'll be back here tomorrow. Aloha, America.